Hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar presentation by Pure Storage and Recovery Point Software. I'm your host, Greg Schultz, and we are going to be talking about data protection and IT solutions today. Joining me today are Jeff Judy of Recovery Point Software and Andrew Miller from Pure Storage. Andrew and Jeff will welcome to both of you, and please tell us about yourselves, and let's get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. Andrew Miller, principal technologist with Pure Storage. I've been here about 4 years now. I think probably most importantly for today, I actually started on the customer side and actually did a bunch of different DR plans and had problems with funding and had to figure out the technology. But 7 years as a customer, 8 years on the partner side, kind of SC to manager director, built a tech marketing team for a company that focused in backup and data recovery. I've been here at Pure about 4 years now. And this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And I'm still human. And if nothing else, you got to see a kangaroo picture today and, some happy memories with the family. But Jeff, over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. And thanks, Greg. I'm Jeff Judy. I am the Chief Cloud Architect for Recovery Point Systems. I've been working for Recovery Point for over the last 10 years. Along the way, I've been fortunate to have the opportunity to wear many hats with the company. I've worked with VMware virtualization, storage, array replication, fiber switches, network switching and routing, firewall configs, and many DR and backup planning and DR testing with clients and with many various vendors like Veeam and Zerto and Commvault. It's been a fun ride so far, and it's been fun to get to work with all these technologies and just make them work together to provide the best DRaaS services on the market. Thanks, Andrew.
Cool. So I think with that, Greg, I want to make sure we're going to just dive in here. Thanks for kicking us off. The agenda is meant to be fairly lightweight, as it shows you're not too much with the classic quote of plans are useless, but planning is everything. There's a little bit of situational awareness stuff there. So what we wanted to do today is actually start off with, not to be honest with, here's all the Pure stuff, here's the recovery point capabilities, but actually just start off with Jeff and I sharing a good bit of his disaster recovery architecture knowledge. Some of what's old is new is plays in here. Some of the foundational principles are just worth going back to. So starting off with that. And then, of course, as you probably guessed, we're going to dive into how Pure and Recovery Point can actually specifically help you in your environment. Hopefully that feels fair. And please make sure to put questions in throughout. We'll do actual questions Q&A at the end from a verbal standpoint. But as you're thinking about it, you're thinking of a question, please don't hesitate to put it into the chat of the Q&A panel there. I think that's getting us going. Jeff, any opening thoughts before I dive in for a little while here?
No, Andrew. Let's get started.
Awesome. Cool. So like we said, first section, general disaster recovery architecture knowledge. So there are some foundational items here. And one of them, if you're familiar with Simon Sinek and start with why and some of that, the why, what, how, the concentric circle stuff. So when we think about the why do we bother starting even at this level is because of thinking about expectations, right? So, if you go to an organization, you go to your CIO, you go to an application owner and you say, how much data can you afford to lose? How long can you afford to be down? Often the response is, well, no data, and we can't ever be down, right, kind of thing. And we know that as IT practitioners, and yeah, we're a business hat on my head and a technical hat, right, kind of thing. We know that the capabilities that we have, at least by default, without investment and planning and work, that the two of them don't match up, right? So this misalignment between expectations and capabilities. Sometimes I've heard, this referred to as business expectations of disaster recovery and protection not matching up to the IT capabilities as almost the elephant in the room, if you will, right? If you're not looking at the screen right now, this might be the only presentation where you see an elephant go scrolling by, but hopefully it kind of just illustrates the point and drives it home that if we don't take this on proactively, it can be a challenge, right, kind of thing. Because the last time that we want to figure this out is the classic example. Let's go back to when I was out of college. I was a backup admin. And the time when you find out sometimes that things aren't being backed up is when someone comes to you and says, can I restore that? And you're like, ooh, what a good and uncomfortable question, because either maybe I messed up or you didn't tell me or something in the application changed and it wasn't protected, right? That's not the time we want to find out. So what are we actually protecting against here? So there's a lot of pieces here. I know even Jeff, you like to start off with just truly from a customer dissatisfaction and loss standpoint, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. That's exactly right. I mean, you know, you can bring up the list, but it's, you know, the list is here just to show you it's not really in a priority order. It's really related to your situation. But, you know, for me, I mean, customer dissatisfaction and loss just leads to many other problems, you know, when you're trying to deliver services. And that customer could be internal, it could be external. But, you know, what are you trying to protect against? You, at a high level, you're just trying to protect the services that you deliver for your business. You know, to ensure that you have continuity during a disaster event, you know, whether it's a hurricane or a malicious cyber attack, you know, or even the accidental, maybe somebody ran into the fire suppression big red button, you know, took out your data center.
We've got the classic jokes about the fiber seeking backhoe, you know, kind of thing. So
yeah,
those have been out there.
We've seen all, you know, in the DR business as a provider, we've seen all kinds of events, and definitely a backhoe or two take out the fiber cuts.
One here that keep going. Sorry.
No. Well, I was going to say, but, you know, in reference to the elephant in the room that you're talking about, you know, when business expectations are not in line with your recovery capabilities, Gartner had published a recent survey, and they'd said that 86% of the infrastructure and operations leaders were self-assessed with that their recovery capabilities were meeting or exceeding the CIO expectations, right? But when you dig in, only 27% of that group were consistently undertaking 3 of those basic elements that you need for a DR program, which would be proper scoping, a business impact analysis to require your business requirements, and then actually have a true disaster recovery plan. So, you know, that means that the elephant in the room is really that there's 54% of those people have a misconception or an overconfidence that they can truly recover, and they don't know, or they're ignoring the elephant in the room. Andrew,
I felt like I go back to the slide. Look at the elephant again.
Yeah.
The one thing here I think of that I even like to focus on, because it's almost a human thing. So a lot of the items here are around financial metrics or business impact stuff, but there's the very real aspect of the human side, the human cost of this. I mean, these are, if we're not prepared, we talk sometimes about IT, we have heroes and run to the fire, but heroics only last so long, and they only get so far, even at an individual level, and give people, you know, compliments and kudos for it. But the very real specter of employee burnout, and that actually even having impact that lasts past the disaster. I've seen organizations that have gotten past through a disaster or a major event, and then people have been so burned out that they've left and they've taken time off, or maybe even they had, you know, a disabled family member they had to care for. They're in this incredibly hard position of, well, this is going on with the business, and this is what I'm doing this weekend. Not even we can talk about, you know, kids' soccer games, but even just like commitments that they have and obligations. So what is a disaster? Still, we're in kind of foundational stuff here, you know. So I actually have I have twin boys. They're not this old anymore. So, hey, you know, this is more, if we don't laugh, we cry sometimes. So we want to take it seriously. But this at a personal level, you can actually see this 2 ways. It's either a disaster if you walk into this as a parent, or if you're a kid, this is a super happy childhood memory, you know, of the time that you painted the town, the living room white kind of thing. Getting a little more practical definitionally, there is a definition from IT Service Management Forum. Disaster, an event that affects a service or system such that significant effort is required to restore the original performance level. So it's not a regular thing. It's a significant event, a major event with significant effort. And here I almost like to do a little bit of a step to the side of sometimes from a term standpoint. This is acronym heavy, as all of IT is, as every industry is, right? So BC, business continuity, versus disaster recovery versus operational recovery. Like, say what? Okay, so understanding and thinking about the differences between business continuity, we have protections in place, so if something goes wrong, everything continues as normal despite an incident. Maybe you lose a site, there's no impact on business operations. It's active type stuff, right? Often this may be at an application level, can also be at an infrastructure level. Disaster recovery, that's where, you know, it's recovering from a crisis that moves work to an alternative system in a non-routine way. Like you mentioned, even kind of push the big red button. That's usually in that kind of context there for a failover scenario. Often it implies, not always, failure of a primary location recovery to an alternate site. Operational recovery, this is more of like do we have multiple power supplies? If we're talking about storage networks, do we have MPIO and multiple paths and normal stuff that would happen inside the data center? PDUs on both sides of the, not coming from maybe different power grids, even kind of thing. So this is more routine, and it should just be, there's no single points of failure, if you will, inside a data center. The main reason I call that out is because thinking about it that way maps back to the expectations. The expectations for recovery time frame are typically shorter or zero, even legitimately, for operational recovery. But you should have your own clearly defined objectives for each of these. And at a minimum, you should know the difference of these ideas and maybe even be able to educate folks in your organization about this as well. So playing out a little bit more, event disaster definition. But what does it look like for us? What disasters and scenarios should we plan for? And even really kind of where do we begin and how do we do it? A little bit of rubber meets the road. So I'm hoping, but not presuming, that everyone here joining us today has heard of RPO and RTO. In case not, even if you have, it's worth pulling this back to kind of the front of your mind for a second. So RPO is about the idea of from the point that the disaster is declared, I declare the disaster, how far back in time do I have to go? How much data do I lose? That's almost the way you say it to make people stop and think like, okay, how much data do I lose in the event of a disaster? And then RTO is the idea of, okay, from the time that I declare the disaster, how long does it take for me to come back online? Now, we also have to define what does back online mean? Is it at a data center level, at a systems level, at an application level, at maybe a front-end website processing e-commerce transactions level? Okay, there's definitional stuff. But from that point, how long declaring the disaster? Then we also have overlaid into here that as you get closer to real time or to zero, no data loss, no downtime, there's the classic bell curve with cost applied to it, right? So the closer we get to zero, sometimes there's a discussion of like, hey, can you have no downtime and no data loss? And the answer is, why, yes, we can. How much money you got? Kind of thing. Or how much budget do we have? So, and even these answers keep changing over time. So sometimes, this is part of why we're here today, you look at the answers 5 or 10 years ago, they were different than the answers 5 years ago, today, and maybe even have different cost things. Maybe something that you did, some pieces that, gave you hours capabilities are now minutes today because of the improvements in technology. But sometimes you even see that cost curve spike for certain things. You want to get really close to zero, it's actually much higher than it is to do hours or minutes, seconds and minutes. And you have to have that conversation with the business. There's a lot of different building blocks there too, I know, though, right?
That's right. Yeah. So, when you're designing for a disaster, you have to start with the basics. And really, RPO, RTO, those are the basics, but it's always good to just refresh, look at those definitions and make sure you clearly understand what you're aiming to achieve. So the slide you see here is just some basic building blocks, and really at Recovery Point, we recommend that you start with the basics. You have to first align your business, your execs, with what the scope should be for DR. You could have the business continuity of the DR, the operational type recovery scenarios. It could be a single system failure or total full data center failure. So you have to define the scope of what you're trying to achieve. Clearly define your recovery point and recovery time objectives, and you base that on the business leader's decisions for what is critical to the business. Mm-hmm. And then across those scenarios that you're laying out that I was mentioning, you can start to plan for like the DR scenario where it's a single system failure. Maybe you want to stretch your networks between data centers so you don't have to change IP schemes. You can do a single system failure and maintain the same IP subnet scheming. And obviously you can plan for a full data center failover too. And then with these building blocks, you got to make sure that your plan's detailed enough that can be handed over to a junior engineer or even a third-party vendor. The scenario could be that you're not available actually in the event of a disaster to do the recovery. So the plan has to be detailed enough to allow the next person to step up and take over. Probably one of the biggest things that need to be taken into consideration is the change management, or as we like to call it, is drift management, because a lot of times you'll see that change management is actually not captured. Your process is there, but not everybody follows it or just forgets to do it. And so your DR environment may drift out of sync with your production environment. So probably the biggest part of these building blocks is laying down the process for change management and make sure that those changes from your production get implemented into your DR environment. And one last thing is, test, right?
Pull this up because we were like talking
sure.
about you were going here, so I was like, oh, let's go here. So cool.
Yes, there you go. Thank you. I love this slide. Test all the time. Increase your frequency of testing. Use automation when you can to scale better. Because Andrew's got the slide up here. Those gaps, the risk between tests starts to grow as time goes on.
Level of confidence. So every time we do a test, we reset the recovery risk. I don't know if it's to 0, but we reset it a lot. We know that things work, and then stuff changes over time because that's life. If it didn't change, we wouldn't have jobs, right? So it's good that stuff changes, but that increases that relative testing gap, lack of increasing confidence. So I wasn't trying to deter. It was like, oh, you're going there, so I'll jump back here and let you keep going.
Thanks.
I'll jump back either way. Okay, so I think. So I think continuing on, so what you were hitting on was building block pieces noted here. I mean, there's a lot from a system connectivity process standpoint. I want to continue pulling that process thread a little bit of what is a process that you sometimes use. And this is where you will often have the idea that the concept of a business impact analysis, BIA, good acronym to know. Makes me feel smart when I say it, right? Kind of thing. But it's really about talking with the business and gathering data to understand the impact of a disaster. What are truly the most critical processes? How much does the business really rely on something? Sometimes we have the classic thing where an application, until it goes down, the executive doesn't say it's really important. And then we realize it is, kind of thing. And then what can we justify from a recovery cost standpoint or a protection standpoint based on that? Now, I always like to highlight that this is something that you can do internally, and sometimes it can be done externally via consulting, et cetera. But it really should be both a technical discovery exercise as well as really just a human conversation exercise. The best example I know here is I used to work with someone named Tom, leaving his last name out, so not give him press, but leave it anonymous, right? It's a while back, about where he was sitting down talking with a line of business owner about a certain application, saying, gathering like, what's the financial impact of the business when this is down? How critical is it? The guys giving me some really big numbers and some like, okay, he's taking notes. And one of this gentleman's employees pokes his head in the door and says, hey, boss, such and such thing is down. And the manager is like, well, yeah, I'm in this meeting here. We'll be done in about 10 minutes. Let me know if it's still down when I come out of my office, and I'll make some calls. And Tom in there is sitting there thinking like, can we back that conversation up about 10 minutes to when you said this is the most critical thing ever and it can't be down? And, so sometimes there's a soft skill level of teasing some of that out that goes beyond just a technical discovery discussion. That's what you then use to lead into, and I want to just pass it back to you, Jeff, to think about mapping things into priority tiers.
That's right. The human interaction to gain the aspect of what the business requires is very important. But, the communication's got to be there, but you have to define what you're tiering into, right? And this pyramid kind of helps show what the definitions would be. At least, those hours and RPOs and RTOs can shift around, but this is in general the accepted a methodology. So you can see here it's like tier 1, tier 3, 2, 1, and then your HA criticality. But in a tier 3 scenario, you're talking about a 24-hour recovery point objective or more. You're willing to lose 24 hours or more of data, and a 72-hour recovery or more. It could go up to weeks or just when I get to it. And when you have these kind of definitions, then you can start to assign your systems and applications into those tiers, which reflects in the costing of the solution. So your tier 3 applications could be sitting on just backup slow disk or out archived out to tape, and vaulted, and then when you move into a tier 2 set of applications, you may still keep those on backup, but you might want to keep them on, say, like a pure flash blade, keep them on very fast disk so you can quickly restore them. Or, if you're able to do like an instant mount of the backup, it's going to run really fast because it's sitting on a very fast disk base. but you also start to get into maybe some replication technologies, so we're talking about Pure, so we're going to talk about like maybe asynchronous type app replication there. Maybe you just sync once a day or every 12 hours or something like that. And then when you get into those mission critical applications, your business cannot suffer more than maybe a minute's worth of data loss, and you really need those things up in less than 4 hours. And what we see really in that tier is really it's the expectations like under an hour to bring those systems back online. So when you get to that tier, obviously it's going to be $3 signs, the restaurant type layout of expense.
I'm thinking Yelp right now. So
yeah, me too. But when you get to that tiering, it's a different solution, right? It's going to be like a peer-to-peer flash array system, maybe 2 X's doing active DRs, to where you can get to more of a CDP, a continuous data protection model, when you're looking for close to zero data loss there.
The one other version of this, and I'm not going to go through it all, but it'll be, I believe, in the follow-up here. Just sometimes, there's more words on this slide. It covers a lot of frankly, the same concepts you just hit on, Jeff. The only other one that I sometimes toss in is the idea that multiple tiers based on days of recovery. And then sometimes you may have things that you don't even restore. You don't bring back. Certain systems just get rebuilt from scratch. It's ephemeral data that's, live stuff that's brought in. So that can even be in there too. As well as even sometimes there's even maybe tier 0 stuff that's infrastructure pieces, Active Directory, DNS, DHCP. Some of those are foundational. So that I can mix in here. One last concept, I think, before we jump into what Pure and Recovery Point do. And it's around the idea of complexity, risk, and simplicity. So I want to get a little bit, I don't know if it's philosophical here, but a little bit almost. So we think about the definition of risk, because that is foundational to what we're talking about with disaster recovery, business continuity, et cetera. So what is risk really? Risk is a function of the likelihood of a threat. How likely is the threat? Acts on the vulnerability, and what's the impact of that to the organization. Okay. So what I want to dial in on here is the idea of what if you have a low likelihood or maybe a low probability, but a high impact scenario. In that situation, complexity is the enemy. And of course, we always talk about everything, and I tell you, we need to make stuff simple, and simplicity is maybe an overused word. Okay, but think about it. If you have systems that are your last line of defense or last line of recovery, disaster recovery, ransomware mitigation and recovery, et cetera, if those systems require day-to-day care and feeding every single day, when you need them, they're likely not going to be there because you have all this other stuff to do every day, kind of thing, right? So we've got tickets coming in, new projects from the CIO, et cetera. So that's where we can kind of almost accidentally get into a little bit of the coffee dog scenario, where it's like if I've got my coffee sitting there, the fires are all around me because there's firefighting every day, there's stuff going on. But at least for today, it's all right. The fire just kept my coffee warm, made it a little bit exciting, but didn't go crazy. If you go find the rest of this cartoon, it actually gets a little weird as the little dog like melts away kind of thing. But we can almost become, I don't want to say apathetic, but just like we lose sight of the urgent for the important sometimes, or the important for the urgent, right? So the sense that I'm putting a focus here on that for scenario, for project, for area, things that are in this area, and where it's high impact when it happens, but not happening every day, we really need to make sure that it is simple and easily maintainable on the back end, because otherwise we'll be here. So kind of final joke. We'll be in that scenario of where I used to be every day as a backup admin coming in, where I see this wall of red failed backup jobs. I was like, really? I just fixed all that yesterday. Like, we don't want this to be you. I'll toss it back to you, Jeff, before we move into section number 2. But I think I've talked enough for a little while.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, just to kind of recap on that, to avoid that sad panda situation, it's the things we discussed here. It's really just laying out your DR plan. Think through what the steps could be, run tabletop exercises, and working through those kind of things helps to avoid that employee burnout, avoid the customer's dissatisfaction, things like that. And it's going to strengthen your team. It's going to embolden the team to be able to feel the success when they can run a successful DR test or a true DR event. They have success with that. So
we've gone through, thank you. We've gone through a good bit. We're done section number 1, data protection, architecture, knowledge. Greg, I appreciate you joining us today. And I know from chatting, and even I'm just thinking like folks should go check out your Twitter feed and everything else that you do, that you've got a lot of background in this space. before we go into section 2, is there anything that we were just walking through that you want to highlight, or frankly, just additional perspective too, please?
Yeah, thanks, thanks, Andrew and Jeff. A lot of great info there that you've been able to pack into a short amount of time. What's interesting is the common themes. It's about the business. We forget that. It's about the business. Also, everything is not the same, but we always treat everything the same. We always do everything the same way. We've always done it this way, but we swap out old things for new things. Then we use the new things in old ways. So that's part of it. And you mentioned metrics that matter. And one of the things that is foundational is that there are the component RTOs, the database, the file system, the storage system, all the different pieces. But what matters to the business, what matters to the users is that that composite, that holistic number. You could have a world-setting RPO, RTO for one of those components, but it's that holistic, it's that composite of when things actually are not only on, but that they're usable and people can start updating again. And then another key theme in there is I love that idea about the training. So important. And, the plan is just a plan until the first thing happens. Then you're off on your own. And that whole notion of, look, if you're relying on a single person for your recovery, you have a disaster situation right there that you have to invest in your people, the processes, but everybody should have a backup. The whole program should be resilient in itself in that you train for it, you practice it without causing a disaster, and that it's a moving entity that's got complete business buy-in. So having said all of that, let's get into this a little bit more. And certainly, there's a lot of different aspects to this, a lot of threats, of course, ransomware, but then there's all the other non-marquee common threats that can impact us that just may not make the headline news. So Jeff and Andrew, take us into the next section of your presentation, including what people can do today.
Happy to. Thank you, Greg. And I love the perspective, the emphasis, because you're right. We ran through a lot, and I even think of I used to sometimes do when I was giving presentations live like this. I do that. Is anyone willing to raise their hand about did they test their DR plan in the last 3 months? 6 months, 12 months, and I'd be like, okay, I won't make it awkward and ask people to raise their hands. Maybe your boss is in the room and you don't want to raise your hand in front of him, kind of thing. So, but what can we actually do? So there's a lot here. And frankly, some of this is, if you have more questions as we're going through, please make sure to put them in, as well as, of course, we can schedule follow-ups individually, because there's more here than we can cover in a presentation. But what going into kind of, so what about Recovery Point and Pure? I'll keep going here for a little bit, because what I want to discuss is really around the building blocks that Pure offers, that then we work jointly with Recovery Point as Recovery Point builds into solutions, right? Just recognizing kind of where we both sit in the industry and the landscape and how we work together. So while there are capabilities across the whole Pure product portfolio, there's things with Portworx, container native stuff. There's things that we do with FlashBlade, with object and fast file and unstructured data. Where I want to focus in right now is really around the specific capabilities that are built into FlashArray. So FlashArray is classically our block storage product that is very low latency. There's multiple options there with different performance profiles. It's still all flash, period. But I always want to start with, I'm not making this up. We talked about RPO and RTO. Thinking about what are the capabilities that we have that layer on top of RPO and RTO. So we have synchronous capabilities. We have near synchronous capabilities, even sometimes this is active DR, even an RPO as low as in the seconds range. So synchronous replication, have to wait for the acknowledgement back. These now go into that you send the write across the wire as quickly as possible, but you don't wait for the acknowledgement back. So you can now get outside the classic, 100-mile ish boundary for synchronous replication, periodic scheduled replication, offload of snapshots, and even local snapshots. I like to say snapshots on Pure are what snapshots want to be when they grow up, if you will. It's a foundation to our ransomware capabilities. We'll go into that in a second. But all of these capabilities are included on FlashArray, built in, without extra hardware, without extra licensing costs. So that gives some interesting kind of operational flexibility, both for you as an individual Pure customer, current or future Pure customer, also for Recovery Point as they're building solutions, knowing that they don't have to think about it as they're building this out, as Jeff's looking at this saying like, okay, for that one, I need an extra 1 or 2 U appliance in a rack. And for this one, I've got to bake in the cost of some extra licenses, or the customer might have to pay for that. So there's sometimes when I talk about this, I like to go into the idea of architectural flexibility. Because everything is included, everything can be driven via APIs and automation. That's stuff that Recovery Point cares about as they build solutions, as well as there's a core simplicity. And I've worked with a lot of different replication technologies over the years. And I'll leave out some of the names because I'm not trying to take pot shots, but I started as a NetApp customer. I worked a lot with the EMC products. You can fill stuff in, other ones over the years, right? What Pure offers from a simplicity standpoint is amazing comparatively. So both the simplicity of setup, the simplicity of keeping it running, I'll even dial in on Active DR for a little bit. You can use Active DR. There's capabilities in it to actually do testing without stopping replication. Or the setup process is actually like 4 steps on the command line kind of thing. So these are general, when we simplify the building blocks, we make them more robust and capable. They're included. That makes a lot of options as we start to bake that into a larger picture. One other area from a kind of a building block standpoint is there's also, from a Pure perspective, a lot of focus, because our customers keep asking us about it, around ransomware, which is related to disaster recovery, but also not exactly the same thing, right? Because in a ransomware scenario, it's not a force majeure act of God. It's an intentional human malicious actor, right? So we think here about, malicious data deletion protection, someone even possibly compromising admin credentials. That's really crazy to think about. So from a Pure perspective, I like to think about this about, having capabilities that are very simple to implement and operate. Either we can provide fast recovery tiers and backup infrastructures, or snapshots are very simple to implement and set up and keep running without all the day-to-day care and feeding. We talked about that earlier. That during the attack, capabilities are immutable. They can't be modified. That's a fancy word for read-only, plus resilient. We'll come back to that in a second. As well as speed. Speed matters here so much. We were talking about RTO. That's about speed. And sometimes, especially in a ransomware scenario, it may not just be bring it back once. It might be bring back 50% of my environment. And it might be even do it multiple times as the incident response team 6 hours in figures, oh, there's these new binaries, or this account was compromised. And we have to rinse and repeat some of that restore iteration process. And especially it's into an offline environment here. The last piece I want to dial into from a Pure kind of building block and capability standpoint, because I do believe this set of capabilities we have as Pure is a unique combination. You can put Andrew Miller ransomware into Google. You'll find stuff going back 5 or 6 years, because this is a topic near and dear to my heart, as odd as that may sound to say, because it keeps being relevant from a customer standpoint. It keeps changing, which is fascinating in a way, right? But is this idea of a more advanced threat scenario we've been seeing recently, and it goes into what if someone compromises the administrative credentials? And this is now not made up. I'm thinking of a hospital in the central U.S. that's intentionally pretty anonymized, where the day after the storage admin went on vacation, the attackers kicked off the encryption phase of the attack. They later found the attacker's been in the environment for months, and they'd actually gotten in. Not saying specifically how they got in, because I don't want to identify the details. They'd gotten Windows domain admin, Windows Active Directory domain admin access, gotten into the help desk, pushed a keylogger to the storage admin's machine, and then the day after he went on vacation, they kicked off the encryption phase of the attack. That's not bad on the storage admin. These are hard scenarios to think about. So when we talk about how do we protect against that, that's where Pure has a suite of capabilities based what we call safe mode, which is really around the idea of protecting against malicious data deletion scenarios. It's based off of our immutable snapshots. It goes further into even some timers that people can't override about data deletion. Sometimes here I'll call it a permissions air gap versus maybe a network or operational air gap, because often air gaps are a drawbridge that goes up and down. And we can apply this to multiple data sets. And just like I talked about before, we include this as a capability that we don't charge for. Now, of course, you use snapshots and replication technologies. You're duplicating the data to another side, and there's the space required for snapshots to duplicate it and compressed, right? But at core, this is not a feature that we charge for. So when I think about what Pure does in this space overall, included, simpler, high performance, multiple options to be able to fit and adapt to your business, which then we work with our partners, in this case, Recovery Point, and provide these to them as they think about, well, how do we map this into even more of a service and a solution? Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, Pure has so much to offer. I've worked with a lot of different storage vendors, and I mean, just the snapshotting alone is a great tool. It adds so much just capabilities to what we offer. So, the slide that I'm showing here, it's Pure Storage and BPR working together. But the first thing you're probably asking is, what is BPR? And that stands for Business Process Resilience. That's Recovery Point's fully managed recovery service. So we provide the full suite of recovery services for you. We'll offload all of the tasks and the planning from your teams, and we'll take over and provide the SLAs based for RTO recoveries. Our goal is to ensure that you're recoverable 100% of the time. So with BPR, we do things like we'll assist in creating the disaster recovery planning. We'll build runbooks, and these runbooks are basically like stacks of tasks that are designated to recover a system or an application. Within those runbooks, we'll use scripting languages and automation as much as possible to improve the efficiency and scalability of the service. But you can never fully automate anything. Sometimes you have to unplug from production switch and plug into DR switch. So there's manual tasks associated with all sorts of recovery plans. With BPR, we're going to execute your disaster recovery testing quarterly. So back to that other chart where, we increase the frequency of testing and reduce the risk. And then of course, if you had a true DR event, we would run the recovery there as well. And then again, the drift management. So many times when we run through quarterly testing and we run through validation checks, we uncover things that have changed over time that were put into production but not moved into the DR side. So drift management's a big part of the service, and we do notifications and work through you. But back to that risk assessment and frequency and feeling your comfort level with what you already have in place. If you're not testing, your risk goes up over time, and between tests. So you might think that you're recoverable, but you haven't looked at your DR plan in the last 12 months, since your last DR test. So, in most scenarios, you're really not prepared for a DR event. So with the Pure partnership, we've looked to do integration with all of those awesome features that they offer. So this, what we call out here is that, on top of or underneath the hood of the BPR service, we have peer-to-peer replication services. So we can do things like active DR or asynchronous replication, depending on what level of RTOs you're looking for. And then we interface with the Pure API. So we're going to look at what volumes are you sending us? What, how far back in time are they replicating to us? Is that within the set thresholds of what your desired SLAs for RTO is? If it's not, alert the customer on those kind of things. And then, obviously we'll take the snapshot. So during a DR test event, like Andrew mentioned, we can snapshot your entire environment, bring it up in an isolated bubble test, and while you continue to replicate in the background, so no outage or gap in RPO there as we're doing testing. And we also offer the safe mode capabilities too to provide you with immutability. So you can do replication between X to X flash arrays, X to C, depending on what kind of model of recoverability you're looking for. And then we'll provide the safe mode snapshotting on the target side, to give you protection and immutability there for your data sets. So some of those key resilience features that we offer here is a very high speed recovery. If you're doing an active DR solution, and say you have a VMware Site Recovery Manager on top of it as the orchestrator, we can interface with those tools to say, hey, SRM, go ahead, let's do failover of system XYZ, let's bring it online. Then we take it the step further and we go ahead and if there's post configurations to the system, we do that, bring it up on the network, do a check to say, hey, are you recoverable? Validation checks, whether it might be a just a simple ICMP check, make sure you're communicating on the network, or it could be something much deeper, like let's log into the system. Let's query your SQL database server for the database tables that should be there. Yep. So the cybersecurity framework here, Andrew, that you're talking about with the immutability features kind of go hand in hand, right? Mm-hmm. And we like to talk about cybersecurity framework really with the recovery aspect in mind. But if you look at this wheel, we're talking about there's 5 different aspects here. A lot of this would be like identify, protect, detect, and response plan stuff. Aspects are really part of your security enclave. So if you're looking at like, I've got all these desktop endpoints or systems, what is on the wire on my network? The identification of my systems and asset management. So just knowing what you have on the network gives you a huge leg up, because then you're able to identify vulnerabilities, you're able to patch those systems, and you can alert if a rogue system were plugged into your network. And then if you do protection on top of that, you're looking at things like MDR solutions maybe. So you could put like a CrowdStrike agent or a SentinelOne agent, something like that, loaded on all of your systems. And that's highly effective in alerting and stopping the attack rather quickly as soon as those agents notice the anomalies. They're very effective at isolating a system to block the kind of unilateral approach of the attacks that usually happen. And that's part of the protection and detection, really. So and then the best practice here for really all of these things is having a backup of your data set. And we like to often recommend that you've got a 3-2-1-1-0 rule here. And so any type of disaster, this is good practice, especially for cybersecurity events. You want to keep 3 copies of data. So maybe you have a copy, your primary copy is on your Flash X system as a snapshot. Then you have a secondary copy, maybe it's still on-premise, local, backed up to a FlashBlade. And then send a third copy can be kept off-site. You can do replication of a backup set. You can send us your backup data sets. And then you keep those on 2 different media. So you can keep one on disk, keep one on tape, keep it off-site. If you're doing tape, make sure you vault the tape. Keep it in your tape libraries, because the hackers can still reach to the tape library. And then obviously air gap. So air gap could be tape. It could be using the immutability features that are built into to Pure. Whatever it may be, just make sure that backup set can't be altered. And then obviously, as we've been saying all along here, is 0 errors. So make sure that you're testing that you are actually recoverable.
With that, I think we came down the home stretch. I feel like we packed a lot into the last 42, 43 minutes or so. Hopefully folks are expecting kind of that velocity of information, but frankly, there's so much more that we can go further into from a Pure standpoint, from a recovery point standpoint. So hopefully you feel like you learned something, both in general, how we can help, that this is enabled by Pure and Recovery Point's comprehensive, all-included, simplified, differentiated data protection capabilities, like it says. I think we are over to questions and answers. If you don't mind helping us out there, Greg, but I think we got down the home stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. We got time for a couple of quick questions. That was some more great information, Jeff and Andrew. So real quickly here, how can you balance recovery requirements with budget constraints? Quick answer.
I'll do a lightning one and then go to you, Jeff. So it is
Sure.
about the tiering and the levels of capabilities. So thinking about what is worth it, what is the actual financial business impact, and then you cannot say to the business, well, I need all this money. It would have this financial impact on you, and I can do these things in this price category. So it's not, hopefully that even kind of transcends a little bit of the budget constraint into, well, what is this actually worth to you? And let's do solutions that match to that.
Yep. And you can work with us with Recovery Point, because we can help you lay out those tiers. We can design solutions that blend different RTO, RPOs, and cost structures. You could go from a flash array X to a flash array C, to save on costs. So you don't have the high-end system in DR mode if you're willing to accept a slightly lower performance, versus the next system.
That's a great point about everything. Excuse me. Everything is not the same. Don't treat it the same. Understand your apps, your business, the threat risk, the relative impacts, which takes us into how important is protecting the protection environment, being the storage, the backup software, the recovery tools. Hey, if a bad actor has got the creds, how safe are you with immutable storage?
So I love that question because being real, immutable is a fancy word for read only in some cases, right? So we do have to go to another level because if they have credentials, they may not be able to modify the data protection data, whatever that is, but they might be able to trash it or destroy it or delete it. That is specifically where safe mode comes in and says that even if someone has, heaven forbid, administrative access somehow to whatever systems, on customer side, they still can't do that final deletion of the data. So you can still access and recover back from immutable snapshots, go to the most recent point in time before the point of encryption. That's a key value of safe mode, and therefore translates into a key value of the recovery point solution too, with safe mode enabled.
Yep. Yeah. And that goes to the keeping a set of data offsite as well. It helps to kind of obscure the access level from the attacker. So it's immutable, plus it's very hard to reach.
And something to add there is that you mentioned about the 32110 simplified, but don't forget about versions. We always hear about having the number of copies, but don't forget about having multiple versions. So copies of your versions of your copies. But important is have those time-pointed intervals. Okay, real quickly here. Yes. What's more important, backup or recovery? Lightning answer.
10 years ago, backup. Today, it's not about did I back it up. It's how fast can I restore 50%? Ooh, that might be an uncomfortable answer. Hopefully it's not. If it is, we can help.
It's hard to differentiate. I mean, you must be able to recover your business, right? But you might have to fall. You might have to use a backup. So you got to make sure that they're good.
And part again is that rethinking things, how you're using it, not just throwing more technology at it. Put some more thought to it, some more of that brain power towards it. Rethink how you're going to use that so you don't have to just work harder. You can work smarter. All right. So we're tight on time here. Again, Andrew, Jeff, a lot of great, outstanding information. Thank you for unpacking that, right-clicking, doubling down on it, and for the great presentation discussion. Likewise, thanks to all the attendees. For any questions that we didn't get to, those will be followed up with you. You will get answers to all that great information. Up there on the deck right now, you do see Jeff and Andrew's contact information, as well as where you can learn more about disaster recovery, a recovery point and Pure Storage. All right. Having said all that, this is Greg Schultz saying thank you and have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you.